Hey, what's up guys? Alex Espinoza with the Ricky Henderson of YouTube. And before I start this video, I just want to give my condolences to Ice Cold Kenny Thompson. You know, the A's vendor, beer vendor, beloved vendor at the Coliseum and at Ballers games and Warriors games all around the Bay Area, all around the country really. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, Kenny lost his 21-year-old sister, Kiara. Friends of his family have started a GoFundMe, so I'm going to drop that link in the description, and if you have the ability, please make sure to donate and help them out. You know, nobody should have to bury their 21-year-old sister and daughter, so I feel awful for the Thompson family. I hope that they're doing all right. I know words don't really mean much in this time, but I hope that family the family can get through this, and yeah, I feel really bad. So I just want to share this description of Kiara from the GoFundMe page, which was organized by Camille's work union. And it says here, the ATU Local 1605 wants to raise funds for Camille and Ken Thompson and their family, who have suffered a tragic loss. Camille and Ken's beautiful 21-year-old daughter, Kiara, was involved in a horrific accident that claimed her life. She loved basketball, cheerleading, and worked 2 jobs. She was loved by her mother, father, 2 brothers, family, and friends. She was smart, funny, and kind, and lit up the room with her presence. The ATU Local 1605 wants to use this platform to reach members and friends so we can come together in support of Camille Thompson and her family, as she is a long-standing member and friend, and to ease the hardship of the financial burden of funeral expenses. Camille and Ken have both suffered medical setbacks in the last several months, which makes the situation much more difficult. This family needs our help. So if you ever, bought a beer from Kenny or just interacted from Kenny, you know how happy he is, and just can't imagine how devastated him and his family are right now. So hope you guys are doing all right. And again, if you can donate, please, check the GoFundMe link in our bio in the description down below, and help out the Thompson family if you can. So, all right, Kenny, hope you and your family are all right. Now I'm going to jump into this news. It is Halloween. It is October 31st in the evening here in Mexico, and earlier today, the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board held a special meeting to go over the draft deed for the proposed ballpark. This was kind of leftover work from the October 17th meeting that they didn't get to, because it also involves GLPI, Bally's, the A's, and the Stadium Authority. So 4 different parties are working in concert for this draft deed. And the meeting was about 40 minutes long, and most of it was spent going over boring clerical stuff and contingency plans for 30, 60, 50 years down the road, whatever. So basically the deed states that this 9-acre piece of land will be dedicated to the Stadium Authority, and of course they're going to be giving it to the A's. So basically the A's have free rent as long as they are going to be there in Vegas with the ballpark. I also got to give a shout out to Jeremy Koo, who's been at all these public meetings, and this time he showed up wearing a Kelly Green Matt Chapman jersey and a Cell shirt while he addressed the Las Vegas Stadium Authority Board. So, as Jeremy said on Twitter, he went to this Halloween meeting as a historical figure, an A's fan. So like I said, most of that meeting today was pretty boring, but the deed kind of goes in concert with the current lease language that includes a 30-year initial lease, and it's tied to the non-relocation agreement as well, along with 15-year extension frameworks after that, and finally a 9-year extension framework that potentially brings the whole life of the lease to 99 years. So minimum of 30, maximum of 99 if all of the, extensions are exercised. But that's way down the road, and basically they spent most of the meeting talking about scenarios where the A's leave the Coliseum, they leave the Armadillo Dome, and it's still useful. So basically if they leave, then the Stadium Authority would be responsible for drawing at least 150,000 visitors in a calendar year, and if they can't do that, it triggers another clause where they can sell it, or somebody else could take it over, or they could demolish it, all that stuff. But basically this probably isn't stuff we have to worry about for another 30 years. So, honestly, the most important update came from the A's executive Sandy Dean, who is the head of the team's stadium events company, and he outlined the financial details that will be dropped at the next Stadium Authority meeting on December 5th, so in a few weeks here. So honestly, the whole clip is worthwhile, so I'll play the whole clip and then I'll kind of go through and break down of all the different bullet points that he talked about.
I'll reiterate Steve's thanks. Everybody's worked a lot in the last couple of weeks. We had 4 parties at the table, so it took the collective positive efforts of everybody to be able to have a document in good shape for today. We're pleased with the final outcome on the deed, which we'll talk about, especially that it assures that the authority will be free of any liability at the end of life of our stadium, which we expect would be many, many decades in the future. I can give an update on our financing, which has been a topic of some interest. And what I can share is consistent with conversations I've had with a number of folks in the last couple of weeks. For the December meeting, we'll have 4 separate letters related to the financing. The first one will be subject to customary conditions for financings of this type, assigned commitment letter from U.S. Bank and Goldman Sachs for a $300 million construction term loan. U.S. Bank and Goldman have been great partners for the A's for a number of years, and we appreciate their support on the financing here. The second one will be a letter that is subject to the same conditions as is in the construction term loan from U.S. Bank and Goldman, a letter from John Fisher indicating that his family will invest $1 billion in support of the project here in Las Vegas. The third one will be an additional letter from U.S. Bank indicating that as part of their construction loan due diligence, they've reviewed some of the financial holdings of the Fisher family and related entities. And the letter will state that they looked at brokerage statements and SEC filings and independent third-party appraisals, and also for certain entities, GAAP audited financial statements. And we'll go on to say that U.S. Bank concludes that the Fisher family has more than sufficient resources to fund the equity investment that's required to build the stadium. The letter will have qualifiers that says that they did this for their own due diligence and they can't assure our performance. And then a fourth letter will come from Athletics Stadco LLC. And that will describe that we are in receipt of both a construction loan commitment and an equity commitment, and that's subject to customary conditions, and then provide a list of the principal conditions. And that will include the need to complete definitive documentation with all of the stakeholders here, the need for us to have a guaranteed maximum price or GMP contract from Mortenson McCarthy, to have all the appropriate approvals from the county and other regulatory bodies, and so on. As we talked about in July, we've been planning for the financing for the ballpark for some time. Also, in December, we'll be able to share an updated budget for the construction of the ballpark, and that will reflect significant work that's been done by Mortenson McCarthy, CAA Icon, BIG, and HNTB, and then a bunch of design assist partners and subcontractors who are all working together for the planned construction of the ballpark. I should also mention that we've talked about in the past that we would be interested in having some partners join us, and we've just begun the process of reaching out to folks, particularly for folks in Las Vegas, to deepen our community ties and local ownership interests. And at the same time, our financing ability is independent of those conversations with possible equity investment partners. I think that mostly sums it up. We feel like we're on the right path, and that will continue to become clearer in the months ahead. I and everyone at the A's appreciate the work of all of the people here and also the folks who worked, especially the last few weeks, on these long, complicated documents. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
All right, so just to recap, again, Dean said that the A's will submit 4 letters detailing the financing on December 5th. Another big bullet point is he says that they're just starting to look for outside investors, and then which doesn't make sense. And then another bullet point is that they will have a new budget for this whole thing. So let's go through these bullet points. So first of all, the first letter said, quote, that they have a signed commitment letter from U.S. Bank and Goldman Sachs for $300 million in a construction term loan. So this is the first time we've heard any details about the loans. Definitely news here, as this is definitely a significant piece of the puzzle. So again, as far as we know, it's a $1.5 billion price tag, which I'll get to. I think that's going to be changing, but for right now, $300 million and $1.5 billion, obviously 20% of the pie. It's a big deal here, and this is the first we've heard about the partners, the lending partners that they're going to have. So in the draft development agreement right now, all these spaces are kind of blank, these finance co, but we can assume that now those will be filled by U.S. Bank and Goldman Sachs, which are big time lenders that will satisfy the language of SB1 that they need. They need to be have the certain credit ratings and all that stuff. So $300 million they have commitments for. But again, I think a big takeaway from this is that Dean kept on saying customary conditions. So we have to see what those customary conditions are. So 300 million they got, I guess, or at least commitments. So, and then the second letter, which is another huge one, Dean said, quote, a letter from John Fisher indicating his family will invest $1 billion in support of the project here in Las Vegas. So this is the most declarative statement we've got from the A's or their associates about the funding. He says, indicating his family will invest $1 billion of the project here. But again, he had a little caveat saying subject to customary conditions. So we'll have to see what those conditions are. So it's a reminder that the Fisher family, of course, of Gap Fortune, they also own Old Navy and Banana Republic and Athleta. Women's clothing, like athletic clothing brand. Back in 2020, so this is almost 5 years old now, but Forbes valued the Fisher family at about $9 billion. Their individual, estimates are a little bit more current. These are the ones from earlier today. So according to Forbes, Fisher is currently worth about $3 billion. His brother Bob is worth about 1.6. His brother Bill about 1.5 billion, and his mom Doris about 1.5 billion. So, in some legal documents that were filed a couple of weeks ago, his brothers Bill and Bob were declared to own more than 5% of the A's. So, I believe a few years ago, Fisher bought Lou Wolf's 10% stake. It went from 80 to 90%. So I wonder if that 90% is all the Fishers. And then the other 10%, because there's some other investors, they gotta have some sort of a piece of the pie. I'm assuming it's not 90 for John and then 5 for Bob, 5 for Bill. I believe there's some other investors involved as well. So even though they have all this net worth, I don't think it's like they just have a pile of $1 billion sitting around, I would assume, a lot of Fisher's money, I believe, is tied up in a company called Pisces Inc. I believe that's kind of like the LLC or like the investment firm that the Fishers run. And then of course Sansom Partners is another thing that Dean and Fisher have been doing since the 90s. So, I don't know if they just have they're probably gonna have to move something around or, pawn off some assets or get some sort of collateral or give some sort of collateral, or I don't know how they're gonna do this. Basically I think they gotta sell a lot more jeans or sell some redwoods or sell some stock. So we'll have to see where this money really comes from. I'll keep an eye on the Gap filing, SEC filings and stuff like that. See if any shares are sold because, of course, Gap is a publicly traded company. So anytime they sell stocks or buy stocks, it's publicly available. So I'll keep checking that and monitoring that and see if any big money moves through Gap. Otherwise, if it's through like Sansom Partners and one of their private investment firms, probably won't be able to do that. So we don't really know where the tentacles are at. I believe the Fisher family is like the biggest owner of coastal redwoods in the entire world. They pretty much own like all the redwoods up in like Mendocino and the Lost Coast and all that stuff. So they definitely got assets, but we'll see how much cash they can put together to reach that $1 billion goal that they say. So the third letter, according to Dean, will come from U.S. Bank verifying that the Fishers are indeed billionaires and have, quote, more than sufficient resources to fund the equity investment that is required to build the stadium. So again, how much liquid money the Fishers are really have and how many assets they might have to sell off to do this, we will see. But so these are probably the third-party financial filings that were first referenced by the Las Vegas Review-Journal, who reported a few weeks ago that Steve Hill and Las Vegas Stadium Authority CFO Ed Finger reviewed some financial documents verifying that the Fishers are indeed rich. So, but I think they just need to do this to check off a box from SB1 that'll satisfy the language, that they have, adequate, they've proven that they have financial backing and the ability to pay for it. And then the draft development agreement also mentions like financial adequacy. So the Fishers are definitely billionaires and can foot $1 billion if they move enough money around. I think we all agree with that. So that has been confirmed, but we'll see how that goes, because it sounds like the stuff is still a little bit in limbo. And finally, the fourth letter will come from Stadium Events Company, just basically saying that there's a receipt of all of this stuff happening. Basically just some cleanup, housekeeping, stuff like that. So after hearing this from Dean, we kind of have a new outlook about the financing structure so far that the A's are proposing for this ballpark. So right now it's $1 billion from the Fishers, about $350 million in public funds out of the potential 380. Dean said that just based on their revenue projections for the life of this project, they're probably going to be closer to $350 million in public funds. So that's where that comes from. And then $300 million in that loan from U.S. Bank and Goldman Sachs, which we just learned about. So if you add that up, that brings you to $1.65 billion in commitments. However, I think they will still be short, and that's why they are still seeking $500 million in outside investors. So back to the bullet points with Dean. He went on to say that they will present an updated construction budget, which he also alluded to in an earlier meeting earlier this year. And he said, prices for these things always go up, they never go down. So we have to assume that $1.5 billion price tag is going up, especially if they already have $1.65 billion in investment, and they're looking for another $500 million if possible. So you have to think it's closer to that $1.8 billion price tag. As we heard earlier this summer, based on developer estimates from Vitamin D, A's fans tapped in with the developer scene in Vegas. Or perhaps it's closer to $2 billion, as these big Vegas projects in recent years have had big overruns. The Sphere, which was recently congratulating the Dodgers on their World Series win, was supposed to cost $1.2 billion, but it ended up costing $2.3, so that's almost 50% over budget. And then Allegiant Stadium was initially touted as a $1.4 billion project, but the budget eventually grew to $1.9 billion. So $500 million over budget, about 33% or 30% over budget. So, or even more, 35%, something like that. So 35 to 50% over budget for those two projects. So Scott Robin of Vital Vegas, we've had him on the podcast before. He's been probably the loudest critic out of Vegas about this whole thing. And he's convinced that this project isn't going to happen, despite, he actually put out a podcast a couple days before this declaration from Dean. But he talked about recently how he talked to people who were hearing that the price tag for this thing is, quote, a moving target.
Nobody is building a ballpark, a major league ballpark, for $1.5 billion. This is something nobody in the local media has talked about, or anyone else, because everybody keeps talking about how are we going to finance a $1.5 billion ballpark. It's not going to be a $1.5 billion ballpark by the time this gets going. It's going to be $2 billion. Nothing's at the original price. The Sphere missed its projected budget by $1 billion. So we could be talking as much as $2.5 billion for this stupid thing. The cost, I've heard it described by a very reliable source who talks to the people who are involved with potentially building this imaginary ballpark. They have said that the cost is a moving target. A moving target, which means everything is whimsical and hypothetical, because the dollars that we're talking about from public funding, from these magical investors, from John Fisher's bank account, none of them are addressing the real cost of this project. That's because this project isn't happening, and it's not happening here in Las Vegas.
So take that for what you will. I know a lot of people are critical of Scott's work, but that's what he's hearing. So, perhaps why the A's are still seeking $500 million in outside investors is because they know this thing's probably going to cost maybe $2.2 million, because with the 1.65 plus 500 billion, that gets you to $2.15 billion. And maybe we're having a real conversation here now about the price tag of this thing. So the New York Post just came out with an article a couple weeks ago saying that the A's are looking for $500 million in outside investors at a 25% stake. So basically, the A's are pitching this thing that they're worth $2 billion, even though they're worth 1.2. So that's 66% increase. They're overvaluing the franchise by $800 million. So it doesn't leave much return on investment room for investors. So again, it's weird that Dean said that they are just begun looking for $500 million in outside investors with a focus on Vegas-based investors to make inroads with the community. But you have to assume that they've been doing this since they made their declaration last April. You have to assume that the past 18 months they've been looking for investors, and they just simply struck out. So they're trying to frame it like, oh no, we just started it. But it's weird because in April, 6 months ago, LA Times came out with a story saying that the A's hired a firm to seek $500 million at a 25% investment. So again, it's basically New York Post just regurgitated this 6-month-old story from the Times, said it's exclusive. Now Sandy Dean is touting it as new information. It's like, dude, I don't know who you're trying to fool here, but I don't know. So maybe that once the A's have the shiny new ballpark on the Strip, they'll be worth $2 billion. But even still, I think that's kind of ambitious, because the Orioles were the most recent team sold, I think, earlier this year in 2024 for $1.7 billion. That includes, Camden Yards, which is kind of thought of as like a timeless classic in Major League Baseball, and they have their own network, their own TV network. Okay, of course, the A's are in a smaller TV market, and they don't have a stadium yet. So, of course, Dean goes on to say that the Fishers don't need the help, and that their financing is, quote, that their, quote, financing ability is independent of those conversations, those investor conversations. So he's trying to say, hey, they don't need it, they just want it. But hey, I think realistically, if this thing costs $2.1 million, the Fishers are going to be short. So that's kind of my breakdown of all the big bullet points here. I think my biggest takeaway is that even with the $1.65 billion current commitments, they're going to be short. I think that's the biggest thing. And I really wonder what these customary conditions are that Dean keeps alluding to, and if these 4 letters will spell them out, kind of like what the X, Y, and Z conditions are to trigger these investments or make them, be irrevocable, or, like basically where do they get to the point of no return. So I think the A's are definitely making progress, especially with the loan. Sounds like they got that figured out, big piece of the pie. First declaration from Fishers, hey, we're going to put down $1 billion. But it still seems like they're looking for more, So I don't think we're going to have hard numbers until 2025, as Steve Hill said on October 17th. The financing just needs to be in order before the issuance of county bonds, before the groundbreaking. So he's kind of giving them leeway to do it up until next spring. So it's worth reminding that the Fed, they recently cut interest rates for the first time since the pandemic, and they're expected to keep cutting interest rates going forward. So it's going to be, they have more meetings in November, December, January, March, and May. So that's 5 more meetings by next spring. I think, the A's are still kind of hoping for a spring groundbreaking, but of course they have that 4th year option in Sacramento, so maybe if this thing gets kicked down a year, they'll still be kind of within their guidelines. So we'll have to see how it goes. I think, the Fed cutting interest rates is also a factor here, as there's going to be a lot of borrowed money involved, and the lower the interest rates are, the less interest they'll be paying that'll be stacking up over the decades, So we'll see what happens in the next few months. Again, I definitely think the A's are making progress. They've been talking about how they're in good shape and doing stuff behind the scenes, and now we're starting to see some of that stuff come up to the surface, So we'll see what happens in the next few months. I think we're really getting into that show me the money phase. So for me, I think the point of no return is really the $100 million investment that the A's have to put down, according from the language by SB1, to begin this thing. So I think once they put that down, I think they're going ahead. So, and then of course might even see some shovels in the ground by next spring. So I'll have a breakdown of the preliminary master plans that A's and Bally's put out a couple weeks ago. Of course, they didn't make any reference to them at all today, which I think is kind of peculiar. But and then there's been a whole bunch of other stuff too, so I'll try to do a kind of another Ricky Report roundup of everything, but I just kind of want to break this down in depth because I think it is newsworthy. I think it was kind of, seeing the A's make some progress here today. So that's a wrap for this one, and again, a reminder to donate to Kenny's family and help ease their funeral costs for his sister Kiara if you can. Rest in peace, Kiara. Good thoughts to the Thompson family. Hope you guys are doing as good as you can through this really tough time. So see you guys soon. Enjoy Halloween weekend, and hopefully I'll have another couple videos in the next few days here. So all right, take care. Thanks.